Welcome to the Rider's Edge podcast, a platform to share conversations about the health and wellness of horse and rider. I'm your host, Farley Schweigert. Hey y'all, this is Farley with the Rider's Edge podcast, and today I get to have a conversation with Jane Cyphers, representative of Owl Manor Veterinary and amateur show jumper and extraordinaire, and we're going to talk about all things about biologics and how that can help with your horse. So welcome, Jane. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Farley. It's great to be here. I'm excited to chat with you. So I think we should just jump right in. I work for a company called Owl Manor, and we make some really cool devices that produce biologics. So what does all that mean, and how does that help horses? We're going to jump into all that too. I myself have been with the company for 3.5 years now, and we're a younger company, growing strong. Our products have been out for quite a while, but we are a bit younger. And I have had horses for a really, really long time. I age myself when I say that stuff. So a really long time. I was going to say 20. I think it's like 35 years. Anyway, so I do the amateur jumpers with my guy who's 20 now, and he is a huge advocate of ProStride, one of the products that we're going to talk about a little bit today. And what do you think, Farley? Should we just jump right in?
I think let's jump right in. Let's kind of start today, Jane, with talking about what we're going to talk about, what a biologic is and how that works, and then we'll kind of go through all the products and how we can help the horse heal itself and really open up that holistic healing opportunity.
Sure, fantastic. Yeah, so what are biologics? I think that's probably a really good place to start, because it sounds super crazy expensive and high tech, and really all it is stuff that we pull right out of the horse's body. So it's really neat, because all of the products that we are going to talk about tonight actually come right from your horse, and only your horse, and it goes right back in your horse to heal it up. So the neat thing about biologics is it helps to tell the body to do its own job. So we're going to help kind of reprogram certain tissues, and I think our main focus tonight will probably be talking about ProStride, which is going to help inside the joints mainly. Sometimes it's used outside the joint, but mostly we're talking about helping those horses. And if you're listening to this podcast, then you probably have had a horse that has had something in a joint at some point, and you've probably put something in a joint. So we're going to talk about how to help those joints stay healthy and look at the horse from a holistic perspective, and put him back to work.
Absolutely. I'm very glad that we were able to connect about this, because there's so many things going on in performance veterinary medicine and changes, and the old adage, when we know better, we do better. And so there's a lot more alternatives to helping your horse's joints, and even if we go on into soft tissue injuries, which I know we will as the conversation goes. But for me, I've been out of the performance veterinary side of things for a couple of years, because I have colts that are getting educated in the world, and so I'm not having to do as much of that performance veterinary care, preventative or reactive treatments. But learning last summer when I was on the road with Donna Kay, that there are alternatives to just doing joint injections. They've been around for I've known about them for probably, if we're going to date ourselves, I know I've known about them for at least 20 years.
Right.
And so my ears really perked up when I figured out that there was an alternative, and that alternative class is called biologics. And so kind of talk to us a little bit more. We've got a little bit of the definition of biologics, but talk to us about ProStride and what it is and how you can use it, and let's help horse owners get more educated so that they can have conversations with their veterinarians and their teams, whether it's veterinarians, farriers, physical therapists, to help their horse.
Yeah, and I think you just nailed it. It is a team approach. Anytime we get these injuries with horses, be it similar to what you said, an overuse injury, maybe something we're trying to do as a preventative, and sometimes, frankly, we're just looking for a performance enhancement, if you will. Maybe this horse is, on a grade, he's maybe even just a 0.5. Maybe you just see a little bit of something, or it's just late coming on those changes, or, it's just not getting as close to the barrel as it used to. And there's just that little extra something that you're looking for. These kind of products can also take a place in there where we can get a little more longevity out of treating these horses and hopefully get them back to, a healthier state of work. I mean, our athletes it's super fun. I mean, we love performing on them. We love having a partner with us, but ultimately we just love them. And we love horses, and we love putting everything that we can into them. And at the end of the day, we look at our babies and we just want them to feel good. And when they don't feel good, it's heartbreaking. Unfortunately, Farley and I are both feeling that right now about our kiddos. So we are hoping that our horses with incredibly, the exact same injuries that we're dealing with here?
Oh my gosh, yes. We were talking, in our show prep that we have the exact same injury on an exact same leg on both of our horses.
The lateral side is digital. Like, what on earth? I don't think we should never have planned this call.
No, and I've kind of kept the listeners up to date on what's going on with Charlie through a couple other episodes, because it was so bizarre that I covered that, and then I had that injury. So it's all kind of meshing together that we're talking about biologics.
Again. No. Yeah. So everybody out there, mine will also be getting some ProStride on Saturday to help with his injury. So we'll do what we can to make him feel better. But like I said, one of the best things about these horses are just being our partners. And if you're competing on an international level, or you're competing at your local open show, it doesn't matter. You still love these guys, and we just want to get them back to health. So let's just jump in. We'll talk about what ProStride is. So first off, my company sells a device. The device produces a product. That output of the ProStride device, and kind of have to make all these legal definitions because it is a device. So there's an output of that product. What we're going to do is we start with taking the horse's blood. We withdraw it just from a vein. Your vet can do that right on site, which is super cool. And they put it in this fancy little device and spin it down in a machine called a centrifuge. And we end up with this product so if you know numbers, a big syringe is a 60 ml syringe. And then it goes all the way down to 3. So we put 3 back into that horse. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's inside that product, and frankly, what does this mean? An injection for what? So osteoarthritis is going to be the ugly name that we're going to give a lot of this stuff. But sometimes these horses just, have acute inflammation inside of a joint or something like that. Over time, I'm sure lots of people have heard, doing injections with different types of steroids, acids, some people will call it, so like a triamcinolone acid, or a hyaluronic acid, so putting HA into a joint, putting triamcinolone, which is steroid, into a joint. So those are some things that people will put in joints to help mitigate some of that osteoarthritis. The neat thing about ProStride, we've already taken this stuff out of the horse's body. We took its blood, and we concentrate down anti-inflammatories. We know what that is, right? Kind of like taking an Advil. You take these anti-inflammatory proteins out of the horse's blood, and you put in these other proteins that actually help heal tissues, and we put that inside the joint. Why? I think that's probably, do you even know why? Do I need to dig into that?
I think you should, for the listeners, absolutely, because we're all about the more knowledge is power here, and it's always better when it's, even if we say the same thing over and over, people use different words, and it clicks better with different people. Right. So that's why we have all these conversations.
Perfect. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking at people. So, so please yell if you have another question as we're going through this so that we can help make sure that people get the right information.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go back to exactly what prostrate is in a minute here. So let's talk about what happens inside that joint. Everybody knows that word. Everybody has heard about osteoarthritis, but I think most of us think, oh, that's what happens when humans or animals get older. But then all of a sudden your vet says your 6-year-old has osteoarthritis in its joint, or they'll say juvenile or something like that, and you kind of go, oh my gosh, how could this possibly happen? Is this a death sentence? It isn't. Sometimes these joints just get messed up. I've used this analogy quite a bit, and I think it's kind of funny, but it really drives home the point. So what happens inside of a joint isn't unlike what happens when you cut your arm. If you cut your arm, you watch that skin swell up as it bleeds, and then it stops bleeding because it got inflamed. And the body, it gets inflamed so it can stop bad stuff from happening, and then it shoots in a ton of blood and stuff to heal those tissues. So we knock off, we make the bleeding stop, but then we also put in all this stuff, because the body is miraculous, puts on all this stuff to heal that tissue, and next thing you know, your arm is healed up. So it's pretty cool. It made it really inflamed, and then it healed itself, and now it's not inflamed, and you no longer have a cut on your arm. So keep that in mind when we start talking about a joint. So unfortunately, what happens inside of a joint is you've got lots of stuff going on in there. You've got this cartilage that's at the edge of a bone. It's this slick surface. If you're not vegan and you've had a chicken bone in your life, then you know that slimy part on the end of a chicken bone, that's cartilage. So it's smooth, and it's so that the two bones can slide over each other really well. And there's also fluid inside there called synovial fluid. And then there's a lining on the cartilage called synovial lining. So you kind of have lots of different pieces and parts going on in there. When overuse happens, we're running these horses all the time, or maybe they just went out and had like a really, they're young and they've been through new training sessions. So they've been, hitting the ground a bit harder. Maybe the ground's really hard. We could talk about coffin joints for that matter. So some of those issues come up. You get some inflammation in that joint. And if the body would just do its own job, it would get inflamed so that it could help bring in new mediators to help heal the tissues inside there. But sometimes the body messes up. And this is where the problem comes in. So if that inflammation stays in there, that cartilage gets chewed up. What do you think happens when the cartilage gets chewed up? Literally a question for you, Farley. What do you think happens when the cartilage gets chewed on?
So when the cartilage gets chewed on, then you increase the friction in the joint. And as that happens, that's when you start getting arthritic changes going on, because just in what you're talking about, I think people, we'll do a science corner here for a second. I think people believe that often that the inflammatory process is a bad thing, and it's not. It has to get started to help healing. The problem that we run in, particularly in the performance horse industry, is we ask these horses to do things beyond and at the max of their anatomical ability, their conformational ability. And we ask them to do it over and over again. So we've put different stresses on those joints, right?
Yeah.
And so then we get that kind of chronicness going on with the inflammation.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to come up with with the biologics, the different devices, as well as other alternative therapies to help the body heal itself and turn the systems around. Just like you said earlier, Jane, the body's a miraculous healer, and we're trying to push mother nature because we're impatient and we want to get back to the next competition. But sometimes we kind of have to twist her arm too to kind of bend her a little bit to what we're wanting to do with competition and with our horses.
Yeah, and it is. So you definitely hit on some of those things. When that cartilage gets chewed up, you get more inflammation. And when you get more inflammation, that inflammation chews up the cartilage more. And then the cartilage is chewed up. And then there's more inflammation. So you can picture in your mind, I just created this cycle of degradation of that cartilage, so it gets messed up. And you guys, you don't think of this as like huge chunks taken out. I mean, this is tiny little pieces, but when you have these tiny little pieces getting eroded over time, just like, you know, you drive over a pothole and you're like, oh, that's a bummer, and then 3 years later you're like, it's going to eat my car. So it's kind of the same thing. Like, it's going to get worse over time unless you do something to stop it. So that's where this super cool product called ProStride can step in and help with that. So one of the things that's in the ProStride product is, so that piece that's going to be what we put back, that your veterinarian's going to pull that blood, put it in a little device, and then pull out all the good stuff that it wants to put back in the joint. There's going to be two pieces in there. You're going to put in an anti-inflammatory to slow down that cycle that we just talked about. So that anti-inflammatory is going to block these receptors, and it's going to slow down and hopefully stop that cycle from happening. So then we get less of that cartilage being chewed up. And then there's also going to be all these healing factors, growth factor proteins. We won't go into all the crazy medical names. Feel free to email me later if you got a question. But so we're going to put in those healing factors too in there, in that joint, and that's going to help to signal the body to help heal the tissues as well. So you get a twofold on this. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have heard of IRAP. IRAP is called, people talk about it like it's just an injection. It's actually interleukin receptor antagonist protein. So it's not a marketed name necessarily. It's also actually a name of a protein. So that protein is in the ProStride solution as well, as these growth factor proteins. So you do have that anti-inflammatory that y'all have heard about. And then the growth factor proteins we talk about, a lot of times people will hear about that and they think platelet-rich plasma. We've heard that on human side, it's PRP. So there's some of the factors of both of those that go into the joint. So what does that mean for you long-term with your horse? It means that he feels better. You're going to see pretty good results within anywhere from, 2 to 7 days. You're probably going to see some changes in that horse, start feeling better. But things that broke down take a long time to heal. So the neat thing about it is you're like, wow, my horse feels great at, 2 weeks. But then at 3 weeks, you're like, wow, he feels even better. And at 4 weeks, he may feel even better than he did at 3. And that's just kind of a neat, it's always fun to feel that increase in, power, performance, ease of comfort. Maybe they start dropping their head better. It's all these little things that come into play once that horse starts feeling better. Questions, Farley, that I always get asked is like, how long does this stuff last? That's a big one. We have so much research out there, guys, but I hate to go down the science hole. I mean, we've got papers that show these horses have relief out to a year, but I'm going to tell you, you got to talk to your vet, and we start talking about the condition of the joint, the performance level you have these horses at. It could be anywhere from, 6 to 12 months. And, it's frankly, I got an old man that goes 18 on his hawk. So, and that's what's kind of neat about it is these guys can get treated. Maybe the young ones only get treated one time and you don't have to do it again if we catch things early enough.
Well, exactly, Jane. And it just changes things up, and it's a total different mindset and ball game in thinking on how you treat your horse and what you're going to do. It's not every 6 months I've got to run and go get joint injections, and I've got to time it to where I'm off 3 days to 2 weeks, depending upon what protocol you've got to use. And it's talking to your vet and working on the best situation for you, your horse's fitness level, and your competition goals and everything that way. But it just gives so many more options, because if I can catch it in my young horses, if you're catching it in maturity age horses, just think about the change. You're changing the trajectory of their career.
Absolutely.
That they can go on and be much more successful open horses for these riders. And so it's a total mind shift. And that's why I'm so excited about this conversation for people tonight, so that they can learn that there are other options for their horses. And we can get we can get out of this mind shift of, oh, I can only do so many injections and I've got to time this and I've got to do that. And so it changes that because like you've said earlier, you are literally re-injecting the horse's natural proteins and natural healing factors that their body creates, and you're just putting that into a megaphone and putting that back into a local location.
Oh, I love how you said that, a megaphone. I'm going to probably steal that. That is exactly what it does too. All of that stuff is in their blood. I mean, it is. And so what these little cool devices that your veterinarian's going to bring and put your horse's blood in, that's exactly what it does. It magnifies the anti-inflammatories and the growth factors and the things that we want to help heal, to change that cycle and to help heal those tissues and heal that cartilage inside. When I say tissue, I don't want you just thinking about muscle tissue or something. When we talk tissue, we're talking about structures inside the system. So that might be, joint, it could be ligament. But in general, that's where that term comes from. So that's where that medical stuff gets in the way of all of our normal everyday talk. But, Farley, one of the things that you were just saying there too is we're talking about long-term use on these horses. And, it's, we had a group of riders and from different sports and different levels of riders do kind of a webinar a couple months ago for us during this crazy locked inside time. And listening, I mean, first off, I think they all teared up when they first start talking to each other about what this means to them. I mean, to be able to, yeah, sure, keep your horse performing, that's awesome. But to look at them and be like, we're talking about an Olympian dressage rider that's like, I need this horse for 10 years. Like, I don't want to have to replace them. Like, I want to do the best thing for them moving forward. And I've seen this work in race horses that, I got to tell you, like one of the coolest ones was treating a young filly, and she was treated over the summer, and she ran about 6 months later. She actually had a tendon injury, and she was treated with our products, and she ran in the following December, won a stakes race. Not the following, 6 months later, won her stakes race. And she's continued to just do incredibly well at the big tracks out in California. And, that's one horse, but it's a really fun story when when people are calling you and they're just, I've got riders that have called me and said, I never thought I'd ride my horse again. And they send me video before and after. And I don't even know why I just get so excited about it. I'm like, it makes my day getting a video like that. And this horse still isn't, it's not 100%. It isn't, but she never thought she'd ride it again. It was 4 out of 5 lame, and it's like a 1 now, and she gets to ride her horse, and she's thrilled to death. And that, I think, is the big thing here. Like, sure, performance, we do want to get back and compete with them, and that it's there for that, for sure. It's also there for the person that wants to be able to pleasure ride their horse again. There's a lot of places and positions that this stuff can be used in. And ultimately, we talked about this before we started the podcast today too. One of the things that Farley is so cool about doing is doing PT and working with these horses. Well, once you get these horses put back together and you knock out that inflammation in those joints and you make them feel better, they can go back to work properly. And Farley, you can kind of, go and jump in on that one, because I think that's probably one of the neatest things that we got going with this package.
Oh my gosh, yes. You take ProStride and you get this healed up, and then you can go look at the whole approach, because the horse is much different than we are. We walk on 2 legs, they walk on 4, and so there's a lot of imbalances there. And so what ProStride will do is it's working at the tissue level, whether it be joint, ligament, tendon, what have you, to heal there. And when we get all that calmed down, we can go as therapists look at the bigger picture and get the rest of the muscle in balance, whether it be muscle imbalance or a fitness thing. It can be a number of things going on. Because we have things going on with our athletes every day. And so this is just, I don't know, gosh, it's like It's just like setting up the, softball to hit the run out of the park. It's just kind of that lob pitch there to get the ball rolling in order to get everything treated correctly. The old adage of, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
When we know better that we can heal things better and we can see the whole picture, I think we're real remiss to just stay at, my horse's hocks need done every 6 months, and I'm just going to continue to walk, trot, lope them, and run them 3 times a weekend, and keep them at that same fitness level. Because, whether we're talking about show jumping, running barrels, roping, whatever, it's tough. And you need to get every advantage you can with your horse to get where you want to be.
100%. I mean, we were talking about that a little bit earlier today, and you guys, I have a 20-year-old, and when he was 18, we started really. I was lucky, and I got some really good vet care, and we found some issues that he had, and one being his stifle was actually the original thing that brought him off the track when he was 7 years old. He came into my life much later, but at 18, we were able to treat that joint with ProStride. And the first time it was like 9 months, I think. And then the second time it was 13. It's crazy how much time has gone between each time he's had that treated. And we did ultrasounds, and, you get good diagnostics, you know what you're looking for. And there wasn't a tear or anything like that, just some good old man arthritis and a horse that ran 50 some races as well. But the coolest thing was, and I've said this to so many people, like, oh, is it just because you injected him with ProStride? I mean, ProStride was the thing that got him able to work properly. And then I put him on the hills, and I don't have big hills, but we walk a lot. And that horse, when he can't, and it's in the winter time, then he walks over cavalettis. And when I hand walk him, because sometimes you just got to hand walk or you just want to hang out with your horse, he walks over race poles. And it's a constant, I'm always thinking about his hind end getting really strong and keeping all of those muscles strong. And then guess what? You don't have to treat those joints as often. So this is kind of what Parley was saying there is, keep running them and we keep doing this stuff, and we don't take a pause and say, how can we readdress this program? Make this athlete stronger. And you guys, we got to think about this. I mean, we're talking about athletes, like just like human athletes.
Oh.
Us runners go to the gym too and lift, right? Mm-hmm. Football players, what do?
Yeah.
Some of them do ballet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. We talk about, if you compared human anatomy to horse anatomy, it would be like if we essentially ran around on our fingernails and our toenails. Ooh. That's how the comparative anatomy breaks down. And so, if you're not thinking of ways to strengthen their core, strengthen their hind end, because their hind end is the motor, then, you're behind the 8 ball. And that's where a lot of this breakdown comes to, is improper conditioning. And that's in horses, that's in runners, that's in high school athletes. It doesn't matter. It's not taking care of the basics, because the basics aren't fun. The basics are not sexy. It's not fun hand walking over raised poles.
As much as you love them, it's way more fun being a show jumper to go jump a jump. It is. It's more fun, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing about thinking outside the box, and what ProStride has allowed you to do, just like in your case, Jane, the increased length of time in between treatments, ProStride can help, whether we're talking about an acute injury, something in the early stages. If you pull your horse out of the stall and they're 3-legged lame, and you go get a diagnostic workup from your vet and find that that's an appropriate treatment, it can help there acutely, or it can help with chronic issues. So it's a real versatile treatment. that you can use both ways, and really, really a game changer.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. And it's also not one joint. You could treat, I mean, the vast amount of ProStride treatments are going to be in 2 joints. A lot of folks use it in soft tissue injuries too. I definitely have, and I definitely will be Saturday. But we also have some really cool research coming out this fall out of University of Pennsylvania on the ProStride in soft tissue. So we've got lots of clinicians, lots of veterinarians using that. But we like to substantiate everything that we do with science. And, you know, I know we're not going to dig into a lot of science today, but that is something that is just so important to us. And, you know, if our vets are using it somewhere, we want to make sure that they can have some backup. If they say, hey, we think it could work here, we might look into doing a study, and a real study. I mean, talking about double-blinded placebo type studies with people to find out whether or not this, you know, it really has the science to substantiate what our vets are doing. And that's going to separate us from a lot of different companies out there. And it's really important to us to have that. I think it gives our veterinarians a lot more confidence. And shoot, I mean, as a horse owner, come on. I mean, there's so many products out there. There's so many things out there. It's pretty nice when you can say, well, they have a lot of science behind them too. And that's a really nice thing to have. Makes me feel way more confident. And I mean, I just love it. I mean, I get excited about it every day. I got the coolest job. I mean, I get to help veterinarians put their horse clients back together. I mean, how cool is that? Just really, it's incredible. Yeah, this has been, it's fun. ProStride has got, you know, as you were saying, you can treating these chronic or acute injuries, performance enhancement. I mean, I know a horse that, oh man, I know there's way too many that I know of, but there's somebody, the horse went across the country. It was 2 years ago, I think, for the indoor nationals, that for the Western folks out there. It's okay. I'll help you along with this. It's medal finals. It's something that junior riders do in the hunter jumper world. The horse went out there, and the vet had said, listen, when he gets there, he's gonna, you know, he's not gonna make, he's gonna be lame. They ended up treating it out on the other side of the country with ProStride. 3 days later, it placed in the top 10 in the McClay final. So, I mean, it's a pretty cool story. You know, it's neat to see that be used in that facet too. I mean, be able to give this horse, who's obviously incredible, an opportunity to go in there and show the world what he can do. You know, and on the other side, you can also, you know, treat those acute injuries or just tweak performance a little bit more.
Yeah. You know, it's, you know, if you're sitting there listening and you're like, okay, let's bring this back around. Let's gather it up a little bit. You know, ProStride, it can work on, any length of injury, an acute or chronic injury. It can be used for different tissues. It can be used in the joint. It can be used for more of a ligament, tendon, soft tissue, even into a muscle issue, because, again, what we're talking about is we're taking the horse's own biological properties and just putting them through a megaphone and putting them back into places that stall out. Because what happens, and there's a lot of different types of modalities and treatments and physical therapy, along with veterinary medicine, that can help with this. But sometimes the body stalls out, the immune system stalls out and forgets about it, kind of gets things to a level and then kind of forgets about it. And so ProStride can help in that way, and turning everything around, saying, hey, let's go finish healing this right over here. And that's you know, the one more thing that, as you were saying, like wrapping this up, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but as you were just saying, like you're pulling this from the horse's own blood, you guys, you're doing this stall side. I mean, you're doing this at your farm. You don't need to go to a big hospital or anything like that. That's what's really neat, is your veterinarian, you know, if they have the equipment, they could always reach out and we'll help them out and figure that out too. But we can always find you somebody in your area to come to you, and they do it right there in about 30-35 minutes, and your horse is treated. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
And it's a one-time So they do the injection one time. They don't have to come back and repeat the injection. So it's a one and done. And that's, and yeah, you might repeat months and months down the road, but it's not something that's a series or, needs to be done once a week or every other week or anything like that. So I don't think I'd mentioned that, but I think that really adds into kind of, what you were saying is making it just, it's simple, easy, and it's the horse's own blood.
Yeah.
It's products from the horse's own blood.
Yeah.
Your horse.
Yeah. I just think it's great. Now, you guys at Owl Manor, you also have some other products that work on kind of a similar path. So let's talk about them just a little bit so that people kind of get an overall picture, because I'm a big fan of the more you know, the better educated you can become to make decisions, and the more you know when you're not in that emotional state of dealing with your horse's injury, it can help you again make better decisions and have more conversations to get to the best treatment for you and your horse.
Yeah, that's 100% right, and I can talk about those things too. I mean, just this week dealing with my horse, and there was some other thoughts, and if it was this, you could do this, and I already knew. I mean, sure, I knew I was going to treat with ProStride, but there were some other things that were thrown out there, and I already knew because of what we're doing right here, education, because I've learned, and I it's like, oh, I would never choose that, or I would choose that. There's just my own opinion on research that I've looked at. So I think you're spot on there, and we can talk a little bit about the other two products that Owl Manor has, these two other devices. One is, we'll start at the back side and talk about the one people probably don't know as much. It's a device, we call it Centrate, but what it is, it's a bone marrow aspirate. So what's that? That comes from the horse's bone marrow. Where's bone marrow? It's actually inside the middle of your bone. So some people know that, some people have just eaten it at a beef restaurant or something, a steakhouse. So bone marrow is the coolest ever. It's got a ton of, it helps with your immune system, but the biggest job of bone marrow is to rebuild blood vessels. Most people don't even think about that, but it's actually really cool. If you didn't have bone marrow, you actually couldn't heal anything. So it's incredibly potent. It has so many white blood cells in there as well. And the neat thing is this is a bit more invasive, because they actually pull bone marrow out of either the horse's hip, which usually they won't do when the horse gets too old, because it's a little harder to get. And I mean too old by like over 5, 6, 7 years old. It's actually really difficult to get bone marrow out of a hip at that age. So they'll get out of the sternum. So they're sitting underneath those horses' front legs and pulling that bone marrow out kind of with a big sharp needle kind of thing. And they pull that bone marrow out and put it into our little device and spin it down. And it's got, a lot of people like to call stem cells. It's such a generic word. Really, if you Google it, you'll see a word called mesenchymal cells, and those are essentially what people like to use the generic name of stem cells as. So it has stem cells in it, as well as growth factor proteins and this other stuff it's fibrin. So it's kind of like a matrix, if you will, like a mesh that's just naturally in that product itself. So when you put that or lay that into an injury, say, we see it used a lot more in like fractures. So, they process this down, and maybe your horse has, a fracture, or maybe it's a tendon injury that just isn't healing. So it's kind of like the big boy that people will go to a little later. It's usually not a first one out of the gate. They may treat with that bone marrow aspirate, and it's a little harder to retrieve. It's the horse's own, stuff. Again, it's his own bone marrow. So essentially you put that in there, and you're helping the body to regrow blood vessels. And you know what happens after you grow a blood vessel? You grow tissue. Can't have it any other way. So that's why bone marrow aspirate's so neat, is that's exactly what it's doing. It's helping those blood vessels develop, then tissues develop. Then, you're starting to see that tendon heal up, or that bone, be able to lay down those bone cells. And we don't need to go into all that, but, bone tissue starts to lay down, and that's what's really cool about that one. Farley, any questions on bone marrow aspirate?
No, I think that's good. I mean, we hope people never need that, but it's so incredible that that product exists. My grandparents had a stud, a racehorse that broke his leg in the 80s and ended his race career, but he was of the mind that they had him in a sling and cast it up for months and got the bone to heal and everything like that. But as science has developed and medicine has developed, we hope that people don't ever need that, because you're probably in a severe situation when you do call for that. But it's so good to know that there are other options out there when you're, trying to heal a major injury, because we have so many things now that are not career ending because of the advances in medicine.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. There are a lot of things that, we are so blessed to have all these different products out there now, and science is brilliant, and I don't even know how these scientists figure everything out, but technology has changed so much, and a lot of what we saw as career ending just isn't anymore. And as you said, if you're thinking about, wow, you're in the 80s, a horse with a fracture in a sling, yeah, we know these things with a cast on. We know these things happen now, but what if we actually were able to put a little something in there to help speed that along? Maybe even not speed it along, but help it heal more correctly. Mm-hmm. And so instead of putting scar tissue in that, because sometimes when you put scar tissue laid down into certain areas, especially things that need to be flexible, like a tendon or a ligament, we get into big problems there. Wow. So I think that just leads to a perfect segue into the other product, which is, it's our marketed name is called Restogen. It's a platelet-rich plasma, otherwise referred to as PRP. So again, you're pulling the horse's blood, putting it into a little device, and then spinning it down, and then your vet will have this fresh and live platelet-rich plasma to treat your horse with in usually less than 20 minutes. Pretty cool. So what is that used for? We see that a lot used in, some people use it in joints, not as frequently as Prostride for sure, but there's definitely veterinarians that'll treat joints with PRP as well. Soft tissue is really the name of the game on this one. So we're talking tendons, definitely, like, we'll say things like, oh, it's a straight up tendon. We're talking about a flexor tendon with a core lesion or something like that. Some ligament issues as well. So the nice thing with this product is it has a lot, it doesn't megaphone the anti-inflammatories as strongly as it does megaphone the growth factors. And so that platelet-rich plasma piece is going to be those platelets. And then those platelets are the proteins and the growth factors that help tissues heal. So there's more receptors in tendons for sure that are happier to hear from those growth factor proteins. And there aren't as many anti-inflammatory or inflammatory receptors that Prostride may, be more helpful in the joints versus just soft tissue. So, but again, research is out on that. So hold on, we'll get back to you in I don't know, we'll talk again in the fall, and we'll let you know if there's anything new coming. But the PRP in soft tissue is definitely a way to go. When you're treating those, lesion or a tear, what you're hoping to do is, if your vet says this horse is going to be out for 3 months and we're going to start tack walking again, and you got this slow progress, it's probably not going to change that, because, things don't just heal because we put something in them, but they're going to heal properly. So we want to eliminate as much as we can adhesions and scar tissue inside that ligament or tendon, because when you get that in there, that tendon or ligament isn't going to have the same integrity that it once did. And that, I think that's the biggest one, that why we would reach for a PRP or platelet-rich plasma in the case of soft tissue injuries, is really helping those tissues heal with better integrity.
Well, and that's exactly right. The soft tissue is the quickest healer when you're going down through the list of tissues. Muscle heals quicker than tendons, heals quicker than ligaments, and it kind of goes down like that. So you have different receptors. And I think we haven't talked enough about scar tissue and what happens with it. And kind of the short story of it is that it's typically when it does, it's a very good thing that the body makes scar tissue. We need scar tissue to survive, to help heal and lay things down. And so there's a misnomer there that, oh, scar tissue is always bad. It's not. But the problem comes in again in the performance world and pushing the athletics that we do, is that scar tissue is at 70% of strength of unaltered tissue. And additionally, those fibers will lay down crazy ways, right? So if that tissue lays down kind of longitudinally, those fibers, scar tissue will just come in there and just mesh it all together and lay it down, which can alter basically the mechanics of the tissue, what's going on. And so that's where the snowballs get going on scar tissue, whereas PRP can come help mitigate that and reduce that from happening and help it heal more better, as I like to say. If we're gonna
More better.
let's make things more better.
More better. Right. But I just love the way you describe that. I would probably feel that as well, because I think that, that's a really good description, is it becomes, an impairment to a performance course. I mean, shoot, it does for a football player too. I mean, they pop a ligament. You think they're not treating that with PRP? Oh yeah, they are. And this guy somehow gets back out and plays by the end of the season, and we're just shaking our heads and we're like, oh, well, maybe it wasn't real. It was probably real. They're probably hurting after season too. But this is, I think that's just a great way to describe it, is when things get disorganized in the healing process because of scar tissue. That's when we go, well, I mean, do you really think that, I mean, you take a bunch of fibers and run them in a straight line, and then you put in a bunch of crosses in the middle of that aren't going the same direction, and you run that horse around a barrel. It's just not going to be, he's not going to be able to sit down as much as he needs to be able to sit down. And that's the reality. And, so maybe you get your horse back, but you got a diminished performance. And, and I think what we're talking about today is trying to get our ponies back, and keep them as healthy as we can all the way through their careers, not only their athletic careers, but their lives with us. If that means that, your horse got to perform at a really high level, and then 15 years later, it's taking your 5-year-old around too. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? These guys are with us for life. It's best to help them out the best that we can.
Absolutely. So Jane, tell me, for those listeners out there who've listened to our conversation today and they're like, oh, that's really cool, but I need to be able to read things. Like, I want to sit down with this and get more information. You talked a little bit about, you guys have a lot of clinical research out there and things like that. Tell the listeners where they can find more information if they want to get their science nerd on, or if they just want to sit and be able to read things because they ruminate and ingest information a little bit differently besides just listening to conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at pictures is also really helpful. So there's a couple things. I'd love to just direct you to our main website, but it's a bit directed for veterinarians. So we have another one that's called prostride.com, and that's prostride with a dash, so pro-stride.com. And that's going to be a little more for our horse owners, that still has a ton of science in there. You'll also see on there that, if you have a dog, this is used with dogs too. So that's also something nice to see, and we're excited about that avenue as well. I'd also tell you that if you want to YouTube or Google ProStride and get to YouTube, there's some really great animated videos that explain all of our recent webinars with those riders I was telling you about. That's on there too. That's also on our ProStride page. So those are some great resources. Don't have a ton on our Facebook. So I think you're looking at our pro-stride.com website will probably get you in a good direction. And then again, YouTube ProStride, and you'll see a bunch of videos. Neat thing is, a lot of our vet clients have also put up videos about, how they're using it in their practice and things like that. So that's kind of nice to have, different people telling you about what these products can do.
That's great. And I will link both that website and the YouTube channel in the show notes on ridersedgetherapy.com for people so they can just go click and find it. So yeah, that's awesome. So
Great.
Jane, I want to thank you for taking the time to have a conversation. I thought it was fabulous today, and definitely would like to have more conversations maybe in the fall as things continue to progress and change, and we can provide more education for people.
I think that would be great. Plus, then we can give everybody an update on our horses' twin injuries too. And I'll be able to tell all how Pro Stride helped my guy, because I'm pretty confident it will.
Yes, we'll definitely need to do. I have another segment called In the Arena 365. We'll do a In the Arena 365 segment with injury updates for both of our horses, because this is just odd. The way.
I think it's a fun way to go too, because it's one thing to just hear us chatting, but I mean, who doesn't love a horse story? So
100%. Well, thank you, Jane, for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. We'll chat soon.
Thank you for listening to Rider's Edge Podcast. For show notes and other thoughts, head over to ridersedgetherapy.com. If you would like to stay connected and continue the conversation, head over to my free Facebook group, Rider's Edge Health and Wellness for Horse and Rider. Thanks for continuing the conversation, and as always, I will see you down the road.